The office as we know it is dead, and what killed it wasn't a pandemic. It was something way bigger that nobody saw coming. Right now, millions of square feet of empty office space sitting in major cities around the world. Buildings that used to be packed with workers are now ghost towns. Companies are losing billions trying to figure out what went wrong. But here's the thing, this didn't happen by accident. The corporate office was already dying long before 2020. Remote work just pulled the plug. And what's happening right now is going to change everything about how we work, where we live, and how companies make money. Let's go back to 2019 for a second. The office was king. If you wanted a good job, you had to show up 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, sometimes more. You'd wake up early, sit in traffic, get to your desk, and spend half the day in meetings that could have been emails. The other half trying to actually get work done while people interrupted you every 10 minutes. But companies loved it. They could see you, they could watch you, they knew you were working because you were right there in front of them. The office became this symbol of productivity. If you weren't at your desk, you weren't working. Simple as that, except it wasn't simple because something weird was happening. Studies were showing that office workers were only actually productive for about 3 hours a day. 3 hours out of 8. The rest of the time in meetings, coffee breaks, water cooler conversations, scrolling through social media, pretending to look busy. But nobody talked about this. Companies kept building bigger offices, fancier offices. They added ping pong tables and free snacks and called it culture. They thought if they made the office cool enough, people would want to stay longer, work harder, be more productive. They were wrong. Then 2020 hit, and suddenly everyone had to work from home and no choice. Companies that swore remote work would never work were forced to figure it out in like 2 weeks. And you know what happened? Nothing. Well, not nothing, but the world didn't end. Companies didn't collapse. In fact, something crazy happened. A lot of people got more work done. Without the commute, people had more time. Without the constant interruptions, they could focus. Without having to pretend to be busy, they could actually be productive, and they loved it. For the first time in their careers, millions of people realized they didn't need to be in an office to do their job, but the companies, they panicked because now they had a huge problem. They had these massive offices, expensive leases, contracts they couldn't get out of, buildings they owned, and nobody was using them. Let me give you some numbers. In New York City alone, office vacancy rates hit over 20% by 2023. That's 1 in 5 offices sitting empty. In San Francisco, it was even worse. Some buildings couldn't find tenants at all. Commercial real estate values started dropping fast, and it wasn't just about the empty buildings, it was about everything connected to those buildings, the coffee shops, the lunch spots, the dry cleaners, the parking garages, all these businesses that existed because people went to offices. They were dying too. Cities started losing tax revenue, billions of dollars, because when office buildings lose value, property taxes go down. When people don't commute, they don't spend money downtown. The whole system that cities built around the office was falling apart. But here's where it gets really interesting. Companies started doing something nobody expected. They started looking at the data, real data about productivity, about performance, about who was actually getting work done. And the results were shocking. For a lot of jobs, remote workers were just as productive as office workers, sometimes more productive. They worked longer hours because they didn't have to commute. They took fewer sick days because they could work when they felt slightly under the weather. They were happier because they had more flexibility. Some companies saw this and made a smart move. They went fully remote, closed their offices, saved millions on rent, used that money to pay employees more or invest in growth. Companies like GitLab and Zapier proved you could build huge successful businesses without an office at all. But most companies didn't do that. Instead, they tried to force people back. They said the office was important for culture, for collaboration, for innovation. They started tracking badge swipes, monitoring who was coming in and who wasn't, threatening people's jobs if they didn't return. And this is where the real fight started, because employees weren't having it. They tasted freedom. They'd proven they could do their jobs from anywhere. They weren't going to give that up without a fight. The companies that pushed hardest for return to office started losing people, good people. Their best employees left for companies that offered remote work. The talent war that everyone talked about in 2021 and 2022 was really about this. It wasn't about salary, it was about flexibility. And let's talk about what this really means, because this isn't just about where people work, it's about power. For decades, companies had all the power. They decided where you worked, when you worked, how you worked. The office was a tool of control. Remote work flipped that. Suddenly, employees had choices. If your company wanted you in the office 5 days a week, you could find another company that didn't. The power shifted, and companies hated it. That's why you saw all these articles about how remote work was bad, how it hurt productivity, how it killed culture. Most of these articles were pushed by people with something to lose. Real estate companies, office furniture makers, management consultants who made money helping companies manage office workers. But the data kept telling a different story. Study after study showed remote work was fine, sometimes better than fine. A Stanford study found remote workers were more productive and less likely to quit. Microsoft found that flexible work arrangements improved employee satisfaction without hurting performance. Still, companies kept pushing back. They came up with hybrid models, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or the reverse. They thought this was a compromise, but it wasn't. It was the worst of both worlds. Employees still had to live near the office, still had to commute, but now they couldn't collaborate effectively because not everyone was there at the same time. Meanwhile, something else was happening. People were moving. If you didn't have to be in the office, why live in an expensive city? Why pay San Francisco rent when you could work from anywhere? So they left, they moved to smaller cities, suburbs, different states, different countries even. This created a massive shift in where people lived. Cities that relied on office workers started struggling, but smaller cities started booming. Places like Austin, Nashville, Denver, they saw huge population growth. People brought their big city salaries with them. They bought houses, started businesses. The economic map of America started changing, but this created new problems. Housing prices in these smaller cities exploded. Local residents who'd lived there for years couldn't afford to buy homes anymore. Remote workers from California and New York were showing up with cash offers above asking price. Entire communities were getting priced out, and companies faced a new challenge. If your employees could work from anywhere, did you still need to pay them based on where your office was? If someone moved from New York to Texas, should they take a pay cut? Some companies said yes, others said no. There was no clear answer. This opened up even bigger questions. If you didn't care where your employees lived, why hire only in America? You could hire people anywhere in the world, pay them less, get the same quality of work. This was already happening in tech, but now it could happen in every industry. And this is the moment where everything changed, where we realized this wasn't just about offices or remote work. This was about the complete restructuring of how work works. In late 2023 and early 2024, something shifted. Companies stopped talking about getting everyone back to the office. They realized it wasn't going to happen. The employees had won. Not completely, but enough. The companies that accepted this and adapted started doing better. They redesigned their offices. Instead of rows of desks, they created collaboration spaces, places for meetings and team events. They accepted that most people would work from home most of the time, and the office would be for specific purposes. The companies that kept fighting it kept losing people. Their culture suffered, their reputation tanked. Young workers especially avoided them. Why work somewhere that didn't trust you to work from home when you had other options? But here's what nobody expected. The companies that went remote faced their own crisis. Turns out building culture remotely is really hard. Training new employees is harder. Getting people to collaborate spontaneously is almost impossible. All those random conversations that happen in offices, those led to ideas and innovations. You don't get that on Zoom. So we ended up in this weird middle ground. Remote work won, but it also lost. The office died, but it also survived in a different form. Nobody got exactly what they wanted. Let's talk about what this looks like today in 2025. Most companies have settled into some version of hybrid, but it's not the forced hybrid from a few years ago. It's more flexible. Come in when it makes sense, stay home when it doesn't. Trust employees to figure it out. Some industries never went remote. Healthcare, manufacturing, retail, food service. These workers watched everyone else get flexibility while they still had to show up. This created a weird divide in the workforce, the laptop class versus everyone else, and this divide is getting bigger. Remote workers can live anywhere, save money, have better quality of life. Non-remote workers are stuck. They have to live near their job. They can't save as much. They have less flexibility. This is creating real tension in society. Meanwhile, commercial real estate is still struggling. Some cities are trying to convert old office buildings into apartments, but it's expensive and complicated. Most office buildings weren't designed to be lived in. They don't have the right plumbing or windows or layouts. So you have these zombie buildings, too expensive to convert, too empty to be profitable, just sitting there, pulling down property values around them, creating dead zones in city centers. But some interesting things are happening too. Cities are adapting. They're realizing they can't rely on office workers anymore. They're trying to become places people want to live, not just work. More parks, better public transportation, more housing, more street-level retail. Companies are also getting creative. Some are giving up their expensive headquarters and opening small offices in multiple cities. So employees can go to an office if they want, but it's a local office, not some massive headquarters downtown. Others are going completely distributed. No offices at all, just co-working space memberships for employees who want them. This is way cheaper and more flexible. And then there's the technology. Video calls got better, collaboration tools improved, virtual reality and augmented reality are starting to make remote collaboration feel more natural. We're still years away from it being as good as in person, but it's getting closer. The whole concept of work is changing too. People aren't just asking about remote work anymore, they're asking about 4-day work weeks, unlimited vacation, results only work environments, where you're judged on what you produce, not when or where you produce it. The office died, but it took the whole old system of work with it, and nobody's quite sure what the new system looks like yet. So, what's the real story here? The death of the office wasn't about remote work winning or losing, it was about power shifting. For the first time in modern history, employees had real leverage. They could demand flexibility, and companies had to give it to them or lose talent. This created chaos. Cities struggled, real estate crashed, companies flipped back and forth on policies. Workers got whiplash from all the changes. But through all of it, one thing became clear: we're never going back to the way things were. The 5-day-a-week office grind is over for millions of people. It'll come back in some form. It already has in some industries, but it'll never be the default again. The office is dead. Long live the office, but a different office. one that serves employees, not controls them. What we're seeing now is just the beginning. The next few years will determine what work looks like for the next generation. Will we end up fully remote, hybrid, something completely different? Nobody knows. But one thing's for sure, the old way's gone, and companies that don't accept that will die along with their empty offices. This whole thing exposed something bigger too. It showed that a lot of what we thought was necessary for work actually wasn't. The office, the commute, the rigid hours, the constant supervision. We built this whole system based on the idea that we needed to watch people work to make sure they were working. Turns out we don't. Subscribe if you want more stories about how business and money actually work.